Good evening, Northern Colorado. This is Kilo Delta Zero, Tango Yankee Uniform. I'm net control for this evening's TechNet, sponsored by the Northern Colorado Amateur Radio Club. It's 6 o'clock and we're taking check-ins. If you'd like to check in, please call.
Hey Joe, this is November 0 Echo Mike Papa, Greg in Fort Collins with Debbie K0DBE.
Hi Greg, what's new?
Well, we're grandparents, second time over since last week, so we got that going on.
Oh, cool. Well, I'm glad you could stop by and say hi. This is KD0TYU, looking for check-ins for our TechNet. Please call now.
K0HAX.
I think was it, give me the last call again.
Kilo 0 Hotel Alpha X-Ray.
I thought I had here. What's the name?
Hi, my name is Michael. I'm in Boulder, Colorado. I'm actually just portable out of a hotel room. I'm normally from Minnesota. I just heard you while scanning through the repeaters. I just had programmed in my radio and thought I'd check in.
Well, you bet. And you've got any comments, let us know. This is basically a free-for-all. If you've got any questions or anything like that, please call.
All right, sounds good. Thanks. K0HAX, back to net.
Anyone else want to check in for tonight's TechNet, please call.
K0GWP.
K0GWP, what's the name, please?
Greg from Greeley.
Evening, Greg from Greeley. How are you tonight?
Driving back, driving home, I should say, from work.
Well, thank you, sir, for checking in. Staying in there. If you got any questions or comments, please let us know. Anyone else want to check in for tonight's ClubNet? For tonight's TechNet, please call.
This is KF4DUS, Kilo Foxtrot 4, Delta Uniform Sierra, Horsetooth Mike.
Mike, what's up?
Getting ready to go into Loveland and get a tank full of water because I know I'm getting low.
We won't stop you. Thank you much for checking in. Anyone else want to check in for tonight's TechNet, please call.
Kilo 0 Echo Victor.
Zero Echo Victor, what's the name?
It's Eric up here near car.
Oh, I'm sorry, Eric. I should know that. Thank you much. Anyone else want to check in?
Whiskey 0 Alpha Sierra Papa, Terry in Berthoud.
That's you, Terry, but somebody else was in there. Go ahead.
Charlie GRY on Echolink.
Mark in Loveland.
We had an Echolink, and Mark, was that you? Mark, you're not quite making the repeater come back with the call.
Romeo Yankee.
Sorry, I doubled with you. I'm looking for Mark. Mark, are you still out there?
E0 CPR out of Loveland.
I got you that time. Okay. There was somebody on the Echolink. Please come back.
N5GRY, Gulf Romeo Yankee.
N0GRY, what's the name, please?
November 5, Gulf Romeo Yankee, name is Steve, Johnstown.
Got you that time. Thanks, Steve, for that. Somebody I doubled with, whoever wants to check in, please call. Hearing nothing, come back. Anybody who wants to check in for tonight's TechNet, please call.
KU0 Uniform Foxtrot Juliet, Tim, Fort Collins, northbound I-25.
Alpha Echo 0 Charlie Foxtrot, Ben, Fort Collins.
Ben, anyone else?
K0PRB with K0LAO, Phil and Luann, Loveland.
Are you guys back?
Yes, sir, we're back.
I bet that was a great trip.
That's the part I don't like.
Okay, well, thanks, Phil. And Luann, welcome back. Anyone else want to check in?
Did you copy the Uniform Foxtrot Juliet, Tim, Fort Collins?
Yeah, I got you, Tim. Anyone else want to check in, please call. Okay, I'm going to open this up to questions. Anybody has any questions or comments, for that matter, about anything that's going on? Definitely no political stuff, but any type of questions about radios or any comments about something maybe you knew you've heard. Come on, go ahead. Well, I guess that didn't go very well. Got a couple topics for tonight that I've kind of mulled over a little bit. And RF grounding was one that I kind of was interested in, and not necessarily the lightning grounding, unless somebody wants to talk about that, since we've had such great weather lately. Let's talk a little bit about RF grounding. I'd like to start out with W0EMP. Greg, you've done a lot of that, haven't you? Go ahead.
Yeah, N0EMP. We just had a Elmer question on that, on grounding in general, station grounding. And I went over electrical, AC, house current, safety grounding, lightning safety grounding, and RF grounding, which are all the three things we're trying to address with a station ground. And I'm glad Terry's in here tonight. He might be able to expand on this. The thing with RF ground from your transmitter, tuner, maybe coax switches, is you want a short, low inductance path to earth so that any stray RF that ends up on the outside of stuff, which usually happens because of SWR mismatch on your transmit antenna, you want that going somewhere safe. The problem is, at RF, if something like the ground cable that you're using or the path from your radio to your ground rods, if that's about a quarter wavelength long or a multiple of a quarter wavelength long, that is, you can have a high voltage point there even though it's connected to a ground rod. You have standing waves. So on 40 meters, for instance, if your ground path from your radio to your ground rods is 30 feet long, maybe you're on a second floor room and you're running it out around and out and down and to your ground rods. If it's about 33 feet long or so, you're going to have a high voltage point right at your operating position. So ideally, your operating position's at ground level and have as short a path as possible out to your ground rods. If you're working 10 meters, the quarter wave's only about 8 feet long and 0 EMP.
Terry, would you care to comment on that?
Zero ASP. Yeah, I would. Greg is absolutely right. And the problem is that when it comes to RF grounding, the path length to the earth point matters, and it's on the basis of frequency. And you start getting up into the higher frequencies, even tens of feet, or even tens of centimeters, of ground distance can provide you a high impedance connection to your earth connection. So with RF grounding, unlike lightning grounding, one of the things you try to do is have multiple, maybe different length paths to your earth station, if that's possible. This is the kind of principle that's involved in circuit board design, for example, where you want to have many connections to the case from your circuit board or from your electronics to the case, so that the RF will always find a short path to ground. And if you only have one spot, for example, one point on your circuit board, you will end up with really strange impedance responses. W0 ASP back to net.
Okay, I understand that, but does that mean that I cannot bond, and let me define the word bond. Bond means linking various radios together and then send them to one ground, or would it be better if I just took each individual radio and ran it to ground?
I think the requirements for RF grounding and the requirements for lightning grounding are at opposition in this particular case. When you start to chain the radios, you remember that each of that piece of wire is in fact an antenna or part of an antenna or transmission line when RF is on it. And the further you go down the transmission line, the impedance changes and the radio phase changes.
So I'm still not understanding what that means. Does that mean that I want to run multiple lines to ground?
In a practical sense, only if they have different lengths, so that a particular radio frequency will always find a low impedance point at your radio when it's connected to Earth through this wire, bare copper wire or braid that is not a short circuit. It's part of a transmission line, but without different lengths, and that can be quite difficult because if you're going to the same earthing rod and all your radios in the same place, all the wires are going to be the same length, and there isn't any real difference.
W0EMP, do you agree with that?
And 0EMP, the correct textbook answer to this is you use what's called a star topology, where you have your ground coming into your shack through the shortest point possible to your ground rods or copper pipes, whatever you're using outside. So you have that ground come into your shack, and At that point where it comes in, what you're supposed to do is run a separate cable from each piece of equipment individually to that point. So you have a star of lines coming out from your different pieces of equipment to that ground point. Now, what I have done is I have my ground point right outside my window. And I've got a bit of a bump out here in the room, so the ground comes up through the floor where it bumps out in the front of my house. So it's a very short ground run of only about a foot to where it comes into my shack. At that point, I've got what is probably 1.5 inch wide silver-plated copper braid flat strap cable, bare, and it comes up and it goes to 2 different switches that my coaxes are on, and then it goes from there past my tuner, and where it passes my tuner, it's bolted on the back, and it continues to my HF radio and bolts to the back of that. So they're all in a line about 5 feet long, or about 4 feet from one end to the other. That's not the way you're supposed to do it, but I'm getting away with it. I'm not getting any bad symptoms from it that I've noticed. So it seems to be working okay for me. I could do better, and as a matter of fact, let me reset this. After the emails I recently had on the Elmer's group with the individual, I could have laid this out better. I could have everything much closer to the entry point if I wanted to, by moving my computer somewhere else. And it would be better to have the computer further away from this anyway. I've already blown up one sound card from a bad SDR. I had an antenna problem, and I had a high SWR that blew up my sound card. So I could rearrange things here, and I could do better than I'm doing, and I'm not doing it the way the textbook says, and for now I'm getting away with it. I'm 0 EMP.
Anybody else have any opinions as far as this goes? Phil, you've had some, Mr. PRB, you've had some grounding issues. I know you've told me about them.
Well, not so much grounding issues. Just trying to figure out what to do. And the setup that Greg has is very similar to what mine is. I have a box on the outside of the wall, and then I have a box on the inside of the wall that are coupled together. And the box is also they're both going out to the ground point, to the ground rod, very short. So my shack is just inside the wall off the basement. So it's a really short run with all my radios that I'm using. So, but I've grounded everything individually to a single point, and then that single point also goes out to the ground rod. But you can say that I have multiple grounds going in different directions. I plan on putting in more ground rods. The more ground you have out there, the better, to help eliminate some noise and whatnot. So the remainder of this year or this summer, I'm going to be putting in 3 or 4 more ground rods and then bonding them all together as well. But for the most part, I haven't noticed any RF in the shack, and everything's going well. It's K0 PRB.
You bring up a good point about that, Phil. Now, what you're going to do is you're actually going to put different ground rods out in the ground, apparently, and then you're linking them together or bonding them together for one line coming down, or I guess I don't understand why. Tell me your theory about that.
Okay, well, the theory on that is you want as much conduction to Earth as you can get. One ground rod really isn't enough for that, and so you need a lot more into the Earth, especially for lightning as well. But you can use it for both RF grounding and lightning. So the more conductivity you have to the soil, which is what the majority of the ground rods are going to do, but bonding them, and the way I'm going to set them up is they're going to be spaced out, and then they're going to be bonded with flat strap. In other words, what I call strap is not the braided bond; it's the flat copper, and it's going to be a little wide. And then each of those is going to be bonded around, kind of in a loop, and then each of those bonded together from one to the next. So it's going to have multiple paths for bonding as well, and that's the whole theory of getting as much earth conduction as possible.
Zero ASP with a comment.
These ground rods have to be.
Well, I missed part of your question, Joe, but I also heard Terry trying to come in with a comment.
Well, go ahead, Terry. You have the floor.
Yeah, I wanted to mention my setup with regard to RF grounding. One of the things I didn't do is put my lightning arrestor plate where all of my surge arresters are attached, my coaxial surge arresters. Unfortunately, that's about 8 feet above Earth, and there's an 8-foot piece of wire connecting to a ground. And there are some conditions where, as Greg said, when that's quarter wave, that presents a high impedance to RF. What Phil's doing, putting multiple rods in, is interesting, and it's important for low conductivity for lightning safety. But if the rods are not spaced evenly, but are spaced at different lengths, you could get a situation where it may be a half wavelength or a full wavelength between the point you want to connect to RF ground and the ground rod itself, and in which case you'll have another low impedance point. And the more differences in spacings you get between these ground rods, the more likely you are to pick up a half or full wavelength harmonic on that RF energy. W0ASB, back to net.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Now, I guess what you're saying is you can use this for lightning arresters, but do you want to use the same grounding pin, if you will, the one that's 8 feet in the ground or whatever, for both, for RF grounding and this and that, or do you want to split them apart? Phil?
Well, right now they're common, and seems to be working, like I said, for me. And Terry does bring up a good point, which is why I plan on bonding them in multiple directions. So if you were to put, say, five rods into the ground, say in a star pattern, so each rod would be connected to the next via a path that goes around the different rods, and then each rod is going to be connected to each of the other rods. So in other words, there are going to be so many multiple paths. Hopefully, everything will find the shortest path and be done with it. Kind of like the internet.
It's interesting. Let's go to K0HAX. Michael, do you have any comments about this?
No, not particularly. I haven't done a lot of HF actually. I live in a third floor apartment. I can tell you grounding in a third floor apartment is extremely tricky. I mostly do dipoles out in parks when I have some time to go set up portable. I have some antennas out on my patio railing, but whenever I try transmitting on them, they just don't get out. I can receive some stuff, but there's so much noise caused by both my neighbors and myself. I have a lot of computers and switching power supplies. Both that and the almost essentially a complete lack of grounding that I haven't been able to solve yet. K0HX, back to that.
Thank you for that, Michael. I don't know if Mike is still in there. KF4DUS, I know that you've done a lot of this. You care to comment?
Well, I have quite a few ground rods available to me laying out in the garage. I tend to keep it simple. I know on my 160-meter sloper, it has to be grounded, otherwise it won't work right. Also has to have a good insulator on it, which turned to dust at a field day one time. But yeah, not much to share really. KF4DUS.
It's interesting, because I know I've done a little bit of it over here, and I've been dealing with a actual radio station and an AM radio station out of Greeley, and I've been asking their questions on what they're doing, and I think that they're somewhat mandated from, excuse me, from the government saying you have to do this and that, but some of that stuff is probably relevant to us. Let's see, Steve, N5GRY, I haven't heard from you yet. What do you think about this?
I have a question about using braid. Is that because you want more surface area to go? I've got some number 6 that I was using, and so is braid more adequate ground?
EMP.
Go ahead, Greg.
I'm using very wide silver-plated braid because it's very flexible and doesn't oxidize too badly, and I got a good deal on it. But it's my understanding that the solid copper strap, like Phil is using, is better if you have a choice between the two and you come across some good like inch-wide copper strap. That will probably work better than what I'm using.
So would a number 6 gauge copper wire not be adequate for grounding a station?
For AC safety ground and lightning grounded, it's good. For an RF ground, we want as low an inductance as possible, and that's where a flat strap does better than a round conductor. Just much lower inductance. It might work for you. It might work just fine, especially if you have a short run. But also, if you also have coax running to all this equipment, and you have the coax grounded at the entry point to your house outside, which you should do, you should have a lightning arrestor out there directly on your ground system. The coax should go through that, and because the coax goes through that, the shield is grounded out there. That shield of the coax also acts as an RF ground path for your system. So having that in addition to your number 6 wire might be adequate for you. If you start having hum in your audio, or your audio on HF sideband, people say it sounds fuzzy, or if you get a shock off your microphone if it touches your lip, then you have a ground issue and you need to improve things. But if it seems to work for you and you have no bad symptoms, then it seems to work for you in 0 EMP.
Thank you for the heads up, Impact GRY.
Let's see. Phil, do you agree with that? The copper wire versus the braid?
Affirmative. Yep, I definitely agree with it.
Terry, I know you've done a lot of this. What's your comments?
Joe, I think the low inductance that a strap provides, whether it be braided or solid, is beneficial both for RF and for lightning, because when you get a lightning hit, there's a really high change in current with time, and any inductance, voltage equals LDIDT. So any inductance there is going to allow a voltage to develop. And the strapping works better, I think, for both RF and lightning applications. That being said, I'm using number 4 round copper, solid copper on my earth connections, and it seems to be working okay, and for both RF and for lightning.
Any other comments or questions about this?
Conductor, if you're using a round conductor, you could use copper water pipe. So even a half-inch copper water pipe would be better than the number 6 wire. I use like 1-inch copper pipe for my ground rods. So I drilled into the ground with a water hose and stuck copper pipes in there and filled it in with mud because they're larger diameter and more surface area. But for RF grounding in particular, the bigger the conductor on the outside, the better, but it does not have to be solid, so you can use copper pipe in the 0 EMP.
Eric, K0EV, I think you had a question or a comment?
This is K0EV. Yeah, basically, you want to keep RF out of your shack, and if you're getting RF in your shack, then you've got an antenna problem. But, and you can only do that where, well, I used to do radio station engineering, and we of course had, upwards of 100 and some radials sticking out, and one station that I worked on was in Florida, and it was next to the swamp, so we had a perfect RF ground. And then we ran our transmission line back to our transmitting setup, and of course that was inside a Faraday cage, so we kept RF out by shielding and didn't worry much about grounding. If you ground your antenna and you have no RF on the outside of the feed line, you really don't have to worry about RF in your shack, and grounding is more of a safety or internal currents between your equipment. That's what you want to do, bond it all together. K0EV.
All right, I have one more question.
Does anybody else have any comments?
If you have a ladder line, do you just pick one side and ground it?
Whoever was talking about the ladder line, I double with you. Come back, please. I'm sorry.
Sorry, this is N5GRY. If you have a ladder line, so you don't have coax, so you don't have the shield, do you just choose one side of the ladder line to ground?
EMP.
Greg, you have the floor.
So coax is unbalanced feed line, and you can ground the shield, and you should ground the shield. Ladder line is a balanced feed line, and at some point, because any transceiver we buy today isn't going to have a balanced line output on it, at some point you're going to go through a balun, which is a transformer that converts from balanced to unbalanced. And the unbalanced side of that balun can be grounded. I use ladder line here, and I have a balun outside that's grounded on the unbalanced side. But the ladder line itself is not grounded. It's floating. So you want the currents on the two sides of your ladder line equal and opposite and in balance, otherwise you have problems. N0 EMP.
Steve, did you copy that?
Yes, I did. I just hung a inverted V with a ladder line, and I got several shocks. They were minor, but it showed me that it was energized, and I wondered how that could be controlled.
So how do you transition your ladder line to your transmitter?
Just plugging in the balun on the SO239 from the ladder line created spark.
Okay, what I do is I have my balun outside. It's about 6 feet away from my transmitter being in the shack. So my balun is outside near my ground rods. And the ladder line comes and plugs into the balanced side. And the unbalanced side is grounded. The coax connector for the unbalanced side is connected to my ground system, so it's grounded at that point on the unbalanced side, and then I have coax from there, a very short length of coax coming into the shack. And that happens to be a 4-to-1 balun, which I use a big loop antenna for HF, and that gets me in the ballpark for somewhere kind of near 50 ohms. That comes into the shack through a short length of coax to a tuner, which is also grounded to my ground system, and that's where I do my antenna matching at that point, and I haven't had any trouble with that.
Copy that. Thank you.
The ladder line itself, you have to keep away from people and conductive electrical things like rain gutters and tree branches and stuff. So it has to be suspended out away from everything using insulators and whatnot. So it's a little more awkward to work with, but it's very high performance. So it's worth the effort. N0 EMP.
Yeah, and on your inverted V, you probably want to balance that as much as you can physically, K0EV.
Well, not that I'm an expert. In fact, I'm probably just the opposite on ladder line. I know that everyone that I've talked to, unless you're very, very careful with the stuff, even bringing it into a building or something like that, it doesn't work real well. Any comments about that?
Generally don't do it, but it can be done. K0EV, talking about balancing the inverted V, that's, high off ground on the endpoints and so forth so that you actually have a balanced antenna that you're feeding with balanced ladder line, no matter the frequency.
That's why it's better to have your balun on the outside and then as short a run as possible to a tuner on the inside. Makes it a lot easier to make that entry into the building and 0 EMP.
Hey, Greg, you and Eric doubled and Eric won 100%. You want to come back with your comment?
Yeah, I was just saying, if you want to run balanced line into a building, it's difficult unless you want to cut a 1-foot square hole and put Lexan or plexiglass in it and run the balance line through the middle of that plexiglass. So if you don't want to do that, have a balun on the outside of the wall, run coax in as short a length of coax as you can to your tuner, and then have the tuner grounded. That's a lot easier way to make the entry into a building and 0 EMP.
Yes, I've definitely heard it's hard to work with. Carrie kind of steered me. Actually, Carrie uses it, but I haven't got that much guts there, or patience, I guess you could say. Any other comments?
One DEG.
Hey, Mike, jump right on in.
I just wanted to add a comment about this balance line. Balance line can be 300 ohm TV twin lead. That is considered balance line. If anybody would explain that to someone that doesn't know, like me a couple of years ago, or a year ago, that would be wonderful for people that don't know. Now that I know, we're good.
Thank you for that, Mike. Anybody else have a comment, question, or anything like that?
K0EV, W0ASP on a different topic.
We had somebody right before you, Terry. I didn't quite catch the call. Go ahead.
0EV.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I found that the best use of ladder line, especially back in the days when it was plastic insulators, was making a multi-band dipole array out of it by hanging a shortened dipole underneath the 80-meter dipole, 40 under that, maybe, and that worked pretty well, and then you could run the whole thing as well, anyway, as far as the transmission line, I found it rather difficult to work with years ago, so it was, but it was great for making multi-band dipoles.
Well, thank you for that. N0ASP, Terry, go ahead.
Yeah, this topic is on power line interference, and I'm putting this out there. Hopefully, maybe there's some ham operators in the Longmont area, particularly west of Longmont, who are experiencing this as well. But there is an electrical fault somewhere on 63rd Street that is radiating across the HF band and most strongly on 80 meters. And you can pick it up on your AM radio all the way from Hover Street out to my work location up on Table Mountain. So this is a couple-mile radius, and it is nasty. I've contacted Poudre Valley, and they are trying to assist with it, but I was wondering if anyone else has experienced this and might also be able to put in a little complaint with the power company to try to get it resolved. W0ASP.
Anybody else have any comments about that? Okay, does anybody else have any questions or comments? Please call now.
K0EV with a question.
Go right ahead, Eric.
That power line or that interference, is it a point source or do you pick it up off the power lines when you're going along baseline, etc.?
Quite a bit of direction finding on it, and DFing can be difficult, especially when you're close to power lines. But the source is on 63rd Street in Boulder County, west of Longmont, somewhere near Plateau Road.
Okay, well, K0RF is really good at that, and I don't know if you can reach out to him because he lives down there just north of Longmont. The other thing is, of course, if it turns out to be long-term and you can't do anything about it, is you can null it out by using two antennas in either a time wave or an MFJ, phaser, but that's very frequency dependent. So, good luck with it, K0EV.
Thank you, K0EV. I must admit that the Poudre Valley Power Company has been quite responsive to this, at least initially. And but it's been about a week or so, and they really haven't done anything about it. So I'm just wondering if anyone else could probably give them some incentive to solve their problem.
Well, maybe some other hands in the area, but yeah, if you push comes to shove, get a hold of N0AX or one of those guys at the ARRL, and they'll give you a whole bunch of advice.
Yeah, I haven't thought to bring it up to ARRL yet. Thank you kindly. W0ASP, back to net.
Well, thanks for that. Anyone else have any comments or questions?
K0HAX.
Go ahead, K0HAX.
This is just an observation, but on the 44775, the audio seems to cut out every once in a while.
How do you, would you care to explain that a little bit better? I think I may know what you're talking about, but go ahead.
As I've been monitoring, it's full. I get full quieting. The tone is being transmitted still, but it seems kind of like almost the repeater is timing out, but not quite. The audio will go away. It'll give the little BDD tone, and then it'll maybe come back a couple of seconds later. K0HX.
Greg, would you care to address that as the backup man?
Well, I'm listening to the 275 on this end, but since those two repeaters are linked, and what you're hearing out of the 750 comes over the link, there might be an issue there where maybe a buffer getting full or a little timing issue or something. I'm just guessing off the top of my head. But you're listening through a link, so I'm assuming something is happening there in 0EMP.
Yeah, if you're talking on the 750, I know that they've had some issues in the past with that. The 275, the only issue that we know of is that because the repeater works differently than the one we previously had up there, when you key the mic, you have to wait 1 or 2 seconds before you actually speak because it, for some reason, doesn't latch in right away. So we know that's the issue, and it's something we may not be able to cure. But if there's something like that, please send a note to James and Greg there, and they will get right on it.
Okay, sure. I made a little bit of recording of just some of it, so maybe I'll send a little help them diagnose it a little bit. K0HX, back to that.
That would be very helpful. I know James really likes that kind of thing because a lot of times he'll sit on there and wait for somebody to come on and they don't come on and it doesn't happen. So if you have a recording of it, I think he'd be very, very happy about that. Any other comments, questions for our TechNet?
ASP.
Go right ahead, Terry.
Greg, with the repeater dropping out, there's also that over-deviation issue that we had, certainly with the 275. I'm not sure if that applies to the 750.
Yeah, I think that was an issue with the 275. And if he's listening to people that are talking into the 275 and we're hearing them okay, and he's hearing dropouts through the link, I think it's a different issue.
Heard on his last transmission, it dropped out for about a second in the middle of his transmission.
Yeah, that too, but if he's talking into the 750, again, that's a different issue. The dropouts we were having is when we went to the new repeater here that had tighter filtering on deviation, and that was the 275 when we put the new machine in here. It didn't tolerate a loss of the CTCSS tone during a transmission, and over deviation would cause that tone to drop and the repeater would drop.
Okay, just throwing that out there as a possible option. W0ASP back to net.
Yes, and do remember, folks, that if you have any issues with any one of our repeaters and stuff like that, please send a note in. James seems to be able to get on these things with Greg's help and get these things done almost. He's the hardest working guy. These two guys are the hardest working guys in radios. I still say that. But they really get on it right away. They don't screw around a whole lot, and they basically get it done. And 95% of the time, they know exactly what it is to start with, and because they've been there. So, please bring any information you can to these guys. Okay, any other questions or comments for the net? Please call. Well, this will conclude our TechNet. It lasted 55 minutes, and we had a group of check-ins. Very good discussion on grounding. I do appreciate that in bonding. Of course, the net will again happen next week at 6 o'clock, and Jim will be back. So if there's no other questions or comments from the net, it's KD02YU. I'm going to be clear, and the repeater's open for general use. Everybody have a pleasant week.
This presentation was brought to you by the Northern Colorado Amateur Radio Club. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.